This conference will now be recorded.
In previous session, we were trying to discuss about AWS EC2 AWS provider. What is AWS provider, and using AWS provider, with the Terraform, using AWS provider, how we can create a EC2 resource using the resource block. How we can create, we have discussed. And as I already said, we can provide a provider configurations like region, access keys, secret keys, all those things using provider block. So there are so many ways. There are so many ways we can authenticate with AWS by Terraform. Terraform can authenticate with AWS using so many ways. So one of the way we discussed in the last session is providing the access key and secret key within the Terraform configuration, within the Terraform code, within the Terraform configuration, or within the Terraform code in the provider block we discussed. Let me show that code. Let me open Visual Studio code. So let me show that code. So this is our Terraform code. Here we provided a provider credentials. We provided a provider credentials like here access key and secret key. So using these configurations, when we are running the Terraform using the providers using these credentials will contact AWS to create and manage the resources. But as I already said, this is a security risk, a security leakage, right? As I already said, if we are going to maintain, or we are going to commit or check in these type of code or a configurations in the version control system. So if we are maintaining this kind of a confidential data in a version control system, it's kind of a security breach or a security leakage. So there are so many other ways. There are so many other ways using which we can provide a credentials to the Terraform. Not only these credentials I'm talking about. Suppose you are working with Azure Cloud, maybe you have to provide a token, Azure token to work with Azure Cloud, GCP keys to work with GCP Cloud, or any other confidential data. It is not recommended to maintain in the version control system in the source code. So for now, let's understand about this provider credentials, AWS provider credentials. There are so many other ways. So without this, if I run Terraform plan, Terraform apply, let's say I am commenting this for now, or let's say take this out. Maybe let's take this out. Maybe let's keep it somewhere. I will use later. So now let's say we don't have this. If I go and run the Terraform, maybe within the Visual Studio code also you can go to this terminal option, right? So here also you can run Terraform commands. If I am saying Terraform plan, without that credentials, if I am running, it will complain. And there is no default profile created for AWS CLI also, and there is no access keys and secret keys also. So nowhere it is able to get the details, credentials. If I run this, it is saying no valid credential sources found. Terraform encountered an error like that. You can see. So maybe if you don't want to work with this Terraform, this Visual Studio Code console, you go to the normal command prompt or a terminal where you have your code. So I have my code in this desktop. This let me go inside this terminal. So where we have not given a credentials to authenticate with Terraform. So this is my Terraform code. Here I have removed the credentials and there is no AWS credentials. So here if you have installed AWS, there is something called a profile. There is a default profiles like that. If there is a profile, there is a profile, it will use that profile. The profile means like a credentials. If you are configured AWS with the CLI, AWS configure command with your access key and secret key, it may create some kind of a, it will store that access keys and secret keys in that user home directory as a default profile. It may use that default profile also, but for now, I have not configured AWS CLI also. And I have not provided access keys and secret keys in the Terraform code, Terraform configuration also. So if I try to run with the Terraform is not able to find the credential sources. Credential sources where we are maintaining that credentials, it is not able to find. If I run the Terraform code, it may not work also. If I run the Terraform code, it may not work as I already said. So this is taking some time. Okay, for now leave it. So I am running a Terraform plan. It will say no valid sources, credential sources found like that. But there are different ways. You see in the documentation, Terraform providers, go to the Terraform providers. AWS provider, AWS provider, and go to the documentation. Providers documentation. You can see parameters in a provider configuration. The parameters in a provider configuration is this is what we have done. AWS provider configurations, parameters in a provider configuration means something like this. This is what we have done. This is one approach. So here we have done this way, access key, secret key, we provided like this. We provided like this in the provider configuration, the first one. So this is not a best approach. Credentials can be provided by adding an access key and secret key or maybe token in the provider block. But hard-coded credentials are not recommended in any Terraform configurations and risks secret leakage. Should this file ever be committed to a public version control systems like that, they're saying. So this is not a correct one. There are so many other options. You can use a profile in the provider block. Instead of providing access key and secret key, you can use a profile. What is this profile? I will tell. And also there is a different ways to pass. Second approach is environment variables. Environment variables. Before you run any Terraform configurations, you can set environment variables. Access key and secret key as an environment variables. The second option is environment variables. One more option you have environment variables. So credentials can be provided using AWS access key ID and secret key ID, and also what region also you can set like that also. You can set the region also via access this environment variable. So credentials can be provided using access key ID and secret key ID like that. Access key ID, secret key ID as an environment variable. Suppose in the provider block, you can just define only region. You can provide only region in the provider block. You can provide only region like this. Without providing access key and secret key, you can provide a region. Then, before you run any Terraform command, like Terraform plan, Terraform apply, Terraform destroy, you can set an environment variable. You can set environment variables like this. Export environment variable, like in case of Linux, this is how you can set export. Environment variable name is this access key ID. You give your access key there. You give your access key there. And AWS secret key, this you can give here. But again, you can set like this. Then you can do the Terraform plan, or you can do Terraform apply, Terraform destroy, like that. Terraform plan, Terraform destroy, like that. But this will work in Linux. This export command will work in Linux and Mac. But in Windows, do you think can we set environment variables using this export command? Do you think it will work if you are using a Windows? No. For Windows, there is a different. In case of Windows, there is a one command called set. Set. Set, like this. So instead of export, you can use set, like this. Set, like this. In case of Windows, you are running a Terraform on Windows, you can do this way to set the environment variables. Again, suppose this again can I retrieve this again can I retrieve from any other external secret management tools also if required. Suppose let's say in real time you are going to automate this Terraform execution also via pipeline. In real time, what you do, you are going to maintain this code into the version control system. You are going to maintain this into the version control system. Let's say you are a DevOps guy, you are a DevOps engineer or AWS admin or DevOps engineer. You created a Terraform code locally. You created a Terraform code locally. Then you are going to push the Terraform code into the SCM repository. So this is your SCM repository, not your application code. In the SCM, you can create a repositories for your infrastructure as a code also. Maybe you can create a EC2. Your project, your repository name like AWS EC2. EC2. In this, you can maintain your Terraform code. This is the version control repository in within the SCM repository. Within SCM, you can create a repository with some name, and within that repository, can I maintain all my Terraform code like this? You are writing here as a DevOps guy or as an admin. You write the code here. You write the code here. You commit that code. You commit that code or push that code to the SCM. Now, when I am maintaining in the SCM repository, is it recommended to hard code like this? This access key, secret keys here. Here you may write a code. Here you will maintain that code. Here is it recommended to check in or maintain this way? No, it is not recommended this way. Security issue. So here I can only maintain maybe whatever non-confidential code here, but in real time you may use pipelines also. You may use a pipelines for automation. So whenever there is a change to this IAC code, infrastructure as a code, the way you can create a pipelines for your application code, right? Whenever there is a change in the application, you are going to get the latest change, latest code, compile the code, create a package, deploy. The way you have application CI/CD pipelines, can I have pipelines for this infrastructure as a code, infrastructure code repositories also? Application repositories is different. This infrastructure repositories is different. I mean to say, you are going to have a separate SCM repositories for your application and separate pipelines for your application. Similarly, can I have a separate SCM repository for my Terraform code, and can I have a separate pipeline for this repositories? So whenever as a DevOps guy you are making the changes to this infrastructure as a code, the moment you commit the code via pipelines, can you take that latest Terraform code, Terraform plan, Terraform deploy? You can do the Terraform apply. Can we do? Yes. So maybe this is your CI server. Maybe this is your CI server. This is your CI server. That can be anything like Jenkins, Bamboo, whatever, Travis CI. So here you can have a pipe stages. You can have a stages in your pipeline. You will first get the code. You will do the Terraform init. But without providing a configuration, here you may need have Terraform also installed. Suppose this can be a Jenkins master or a Jenkins slave. You need to have a Terraform core installed. Suppose you are creating a pipeline and you are running a pipeline in Jenkins masters or a Jenkins slave without installing Terraform core, Terraform software. Do you think this Terraform commands will work? No. So you have installed Terraform, but without providing a credentials. If I say Terraform plan or apply or destroy, if I do as per my requirement, if I do this in a pipe, do you think this Terraform can go and plan and create or update or destroy the resources the Terraform installed in your CI system, provisioning system, without providing the credentials to this serve? Do you think this system can go and work with this? No. But before running this Terraform plan or Terraform apply, maybe using some stages or steps, can I set this as an environment variable? Export AWS access key. This is the access key. Export AWS secret key. This is the secret key, like that. Can I set in the pipeline before running this Terraform plan, Terraform apply or destroy? Can I set this as an environment using one stage like that? But again, instead of hard coding, maybe again your Jenkins file also will commit in the version control system. The Jenkins files also you may commit in the version control system, and that is also security leakage only, right? So in the Jenkins file, if you hard code like this also, it's a problem, right? So, but can I use other concepts that is nothing to do with Terraform? If required, can I use Jenkins secrets concept? In the Jenkins, can I create a secret for this access key secret text? And for this access key secret text, secret key secret text in the pipeline, can I get those secrets and set like that? I hope you guys familiar with Jenkins. So Jenkins, you can create a secret text. You can create a secret text for this access key, and you can refer like you can access with secret. I think you guys know, right? With secret block, you can refer that secret and refer that secret here in the pipelines, like that also. That is Jenkins. Suppose you are not using Jenkins secret. If required, you are using any other secret managers like Azure Key Vault or AWS Secret Manager or maybe HashiCorp Vault. If required, can you have some stages or steps which will retrieve the secrets from HashiCorp Vault, or maybe retrieve the secrets from AWS Secret Manager, or maybe Azure Secret Managers, and make those values available, those secrets available in the Jenkins pipelines also, like that? Yes. So whatever way you wanted to do, you can do. So one, you can get this data from Jenkins secret, or you can get this data from Azure Key Vault or a HashiCorp Vault, like that also. That is security management, right? So we can avoid the secrets leakage by a different concepts. You can set as an environment variable, but the value for this environment variable you can retrieve from the Jenkins secret if you are using a Jenkins secrets, or if you are using Azure Key Vault, this Azure Key Vault AWS secret managers also. There is a command you can use, maybe AWS CLI command or Azure CLI command to retrieve the secrets, or maybe if you are using HashiCorp Vault, you can use some kind of a, if you are using Jenkins, within the Jenkins you can integrate HashiCorp Vault also with some plugin, and you can retrieve secrets from Vault also, like that. That is different concepts. But can I pass the access keys or secret keys kind of a data via environment variable also before I say Terraform plan, Terraform apply, like that? Yes. Without running this, without setting this, if I execute Terraform plan, without setting this, if I run Terraform plan, it is throwing error. I can set an environment variable. So how I can set? Using this command. Using this command, like I can set like this command, export, and again if you give ABC equals to this, XYZ equals to this, like that, Do you think the Terraform, I mean to say Terraform AWS provider understand this as a access key, this as a secret key again? If you say ABC equals to this, XYZ equals to this, Terraform provider don't understand. I mean to say AWS provider don't understand what is this. You have to give the key. You have to give the key exactly like this, access key and secret key like that. Understand? So sorry guys, I got some call. So you can set like this. Suppose you are using Windows system. If you set export, export may say it is not a valid command like that. So let me set a proper access key and secret key. So here let me say export command. This is the environment variable name. The value should be your proper access key. And again export secret key, proper secret key. If you are using a Linux, you can see maybe with echo command. Linux or a Mac, if you are using, if I say echo, this environment variable name, you can see this access key is this is set as an environment variable. This is set as a like that. So now there is a access key and secret key. So now is the Terraform will take whenever you are executing Terraform plan, Terraform apply, Terraform destroy like that if you do, is the Terraform will use those access keys and secret keys which is set as an environment variables now? Yes. Now it will use that environment variables, access key and secret key. It will do the planning, apply, destroy, whatever. So I destroyed the resources last time. I destroyed the resources last time. It is saying 2 to add like that. Again, if I say Terraform apply, this resources gets destroyed. This resources gets destroyed. Sorry, Terraform apply. This resources gets created. This resources gets created. That information will be updated in the state file like that. Again, this apply also will refer the information which is defined as an environment variable. It will create a resources and it will update that information in the state. It is going to create a resources in the AWS. It is going to update the details in the state file and also actual resources. In the cloud like AWS, now it is going to create a servers as per the code using that credentials. The Terraform AWS provider using that credentials, it is going to create a resources, update the resources, delete the resources. Now you can see these servers are actually not created via Terraform. These servers I have created manually. These two, these two created manually, but other two servers are getting created via Terraform. Let's see. So these two servers got created, creating like that completed. So you can see that resources here in the AWS. I can see somehow my AWS console is very slow. You can see these two web server one like that. These two got created, but these Docker servers I have created manually. But this one this web server 1, this web server created. And again, without making any changes, again, if you run apply, it will use current state and desired state. It will compare and it will say no changes like that. And again, guys, so maybe if you are using a PowerShell, maybe if you are using a PowerShell in your Windows nowadays, if you are using Windows 10, Windows 11, there is a something called terminal. The terminal is also nothing but a PowerShell. Maybe in the PowerShell this export command will work. The PowerShell, if this export command, ls command may work, because PowerShell can understand that. But if you are using a normal cmd, windows command prompt, normal cmd in Windows 10, Windows 11, there is a PowerShell or terminal, and also this cmd. Suppose if you are opening the cmd and running this export like that, that time it won't understand. So in that case, what you have to use, how to set these environment variables? Set. But again, suppose you are using a Jenkins, your Jenkins masters are a slaves. Most of the time, Jenkins are whatever CI/CD tools. Most of the times, that Jenkins agents or Jenkins slaves will be Linux based only. So there, in the pipeline, can you use, instead of set command, can you use export commands like that also before you are run, before you execute Terraform, plan Terraform, apply like that. Can you use one stage to set the access keys and secret keys like that also if required? Export command, yes, that is how you can do. But this is temporary. Temporary means, let me close this terminal, let me close this terminal. I have closed the terminal, and again I have opened, I have again opened the command prompt or that terminal, that command prompt or a terminal, that session. Now, whatever environment variables you have set using export or a set, using export you might have used, or maybe you might have used a set. Is that environment variables persisted in this session? This is a new terminal, new session like that? No. So that time, again, if I say Terraform plan, Terraform apply, what it is going to say? Again, no valid credentials found like that. It will may think, because there is no other sources, it is able to find the credentials. But if in other sources, if there is a credentials, is it going to pick that credential? Not only this environment variable, as I already said, there are other sources. Suppose I have already configured a Terraform, I mean to say AWS credentials using AWS CLI, is it going to pick that from that source like that also? Yes. But no way I have said so far. In this block also I have not given, in this Terraform, in this provider block I have not given, and I have not set as an environment variables, and also have not configured AWS access keys and secret keys using AWS CLI. So that's why again it is saying no valid credentials found. Suppose I wanted to destroy, or I wanted to plan, I wanted to apply. If I say again, it will say same. So before you run the credentials, I mean to say this Terraform with AWS provider. This is specific to the AWS provider. So can I again set like this? Export this, and do the Terraform plan, Terraform apply, Terraform destroy like that. Yes. So again, I can set as an environment variables, and again I can do. Now I have set. If I say Terraform destroy, it will use that credentials to destroy. It will use that credentials to destroy or planning like that it will use. So this is how you can use environment variables. Now it is using the access key keys again, and it is destroying the resources or applying or changing the resources according to the desired state and current state. So is everyone clear? This environment variables option, the second option, to provide the provider settings. Now, if you guys are using Windows, maybe the PowerShell you can use that, or set environment variables in Windows. Set environment variables in Windows. How to set also in the command prompt. In the command prompt, you can use like this. In the Windows, so they are giving how to set also. How to set environment variables in the command prompt. Command prompt. So you can use something like this, a set variable name, variable value, set variable name, variable value, set command, set the variable name, variable value, like that. So in case of Windows, if you guys are using, right, you can, that can be any environment variable, set variable name, variable value. But in case of PowerShell, what they are saying, this is like that, env colon variable name equals to variable value, like that they are saying. So this is how you can set. But if you are using command prompt, right, you can set like this, cmd, set variable name, variable value. But if you want to see what variables has been set already, you can just use like this, display the particular variable in the Windows. The way I have used echo, here you can use a set that just a variable name, it will display the values whether it is already set or not. But if you have to set variable name and variable value, like that you can use this way. Suppose most of guys might be using a Windows now for in local laptop, you guys install Terraform in Windows laptop or desktop. So that time you can use this set command. You have to set like this. And if you want to see whether it is already set or not, just you can use this variable name. If it is already configured, it will display. But again, if you close that command prompt and open command prompt, again you have to set like this. So clear? In case you guys are using Windows, how to do that environment variable setting in the command prompt again. This is how you can use. So this is one more approach. So if this is the approach, I am maintaining the source code in the version control system. In the source code, am I providing that confidential data? In this approach, if I am doing in the version control system, in the source code, am I providing the confidential data here? If I go with this approach, no. But before running, whether you are manually running, whether you via pipelines you are running, before you running your Terraform configuration, are we providing the credentials as an environment variables to the Terraform? Before you are running, whether manually running via pipeline, you are, whether you are manually running or via pipelines you are running, you are providing a credentials to the Terraform by setting as an environment variables. So this is one more approach. Similarly, do have a few more concepts, few more approaches. And again, whatever you have set, if I close this command prompt and again if I open, that will not be available. Again you have to. But in case of pipeline, in the pipeline, if you have those stages, every time when the pipeline is going to be executed, that time also it will do the setting. Because in the pipeline you can have the stage. So that stages will be executed in the pipeline, right? Like that. But if I am using like this manually, again if I go and run this in a new terminal or a command prompt, it will say no credentials found. This is the one more approach. Clear? What is this environment variables approach? Now, another one is the shared credentials files and shared configuration files. Both are same. Shared credential files and shared configuration files. This is one more approach. Shared credential files and shared configuration files. So basically, this is the AWS credential files. So AWS credential files. Basically, we can configure an AWS credentials using AWS CLI. Shared credential files are a shared configuration files, we call it. So what is that? Let's see. Shared configuration files are a shared credential files. The AWS provider can source the credentials from other settings. AWS provider can get the credentials from other settings from the shared configurations and shared credentials. So what is this shared configurations or shared credentials? Suppose this is AWS related. I am opening this link. It is taking to the AWS. So you can save your frequently used configurations. You can save your frequently used configuration settings and credentials in a files that are maintained by AWS CLI. Suppose you are using AWS CLI, you executed AWS configure command. You executed AWS configure command. That time, whatever access key, whatever secret key you are providing, that AWS will save that files into the user home directory. That AWS will store that access key and secret key in the where in whatever system you are executing AWS configure command. In that system, in that user home directory, it will create some files. One is the config file, another one is credential file, like that. So whenever you are executing AWS CLI command, whenever you are executing AWS, I mean say AWS configure command, whenever you are executing AWS configure command, right? So it is going to maintain two files. One is config file and another one is credentials file. In case of a Linux or a Mac, in the user home directory, AWS folder config file. In case of Linux or a Mac, AWS credentials file. Config file will have a region details profile name. Credentials file have a access key and secret key. This AWS CLI will generate. Suppose if you guys are using Windows, in your Windows, your user again. In case of Windows, users will be this users username. In the user home directory, there will be a .aws folder will be created and a config file will be created. In this config file, AWS CLI will store whatever access key and secret key you are giving, that will be stored in the credentials file, and the region and other settings, the regions and other settings, whatever you are giving, that will be regions and other settings, whatever you are giving, that will be stored in the config file, like that. So by default, there is a concept called profiles. In AWS, you can create a profile. Profile means you can maintain multiple user credentials in the AWS CLI by creating a profile. Suppose whenever you are executing AWS configure command, if you are not giving any profile name, that is like a default profile. That is like a default profile. So there is something called profiles. You can create a profile in when you are executing configuring a credentials files and settings, right, using AWS CLI. So you install AWS CLI, you execute AWS configure command. You may execute AWS configure command. You will execute AWS configure command, but depending on the file profile selection names, it will be created. There is something called default profile. In that default profile, it will have that profile related settings. For the default provide in the credentials file, that default settings will be there. So it will be something like this. It will be something like this. In the config file, even I am not giving any profile name. When I am executing AWS configure, I am not giving profile name. This is called as a default profile. In the config file, whatever region we have set, whatever output format we have set, that will be maintained here. Suppose you are giving some name of the profile. When you are executing AWS configure, you can give profile name. So with that name, under that name, again it will maintain region output, like that, in the config file. Similarly, credentials file. In the credentials file, the profile name, access key and secret key will be there, like that. So you can configure it. Profiles. There is something called AWS CLI profile. AWS CLI profile. AWS CLI profiles. Profiles. So you can create a profile. So you can execute some command like this AWS configure command and profile. You want to see profile, what default profile. If no profile is explicitly defined, the default profile is used, like that. So whenever you are running Terraform commands also, you can use. There is a command called AWS configure. I want to see profile list. I want to see profile list. So you can see the list of profiles already created also. You can see the list of profiles already created also. What profiles are already there, like AWS credentials, AWS credentials, right? So here you can see what profiles are already there. There is a concept called profiles. I mean to say, you are not giving, even though you are not giving, that is like a profile, default profile, it will be created. Default profile, it will be created. So if I am just giving like this AWS configure, it is going to ask your access key, secret key, region like that. So this is, you are not giving any name of the profile. This is considered as a default profile. In that system, in the user home directory, .aws folder, there will be one config file. In that config file, the profile name will be saved as a default. In that config file, you can see this as a region, this as a avail format, and a credentials file, there will be a profile with name called default. In that credentials file, it will store this access key and secret key like that. But if required, whenever you are using AWS configure, you can use this profiles also. You can set the profile also, like name. So for now, let me show that. As of now, I have not configured any profile. I mean, say I have not configured any credentials. You can execute this command, AWS CLI command, AWS configure list. So I have not configured AWS CLI so far. There is no default profile and there is no custom profile also. So it will display nothing. It will display nothing. So there is no profile. There is no profile name we have given. There is no access keys given, secret keys given like that. Nothing is there. We have not configured anything, right? So if required, you can configure like this AWS configure. You know, right? This AWS CLI. Without giving any profile name, if I say, you don't see by default. By default, you don't see any. In this is Linux, right? MacBook. This is MacBook. In my user home directory, I don't have any .aws folder so far. Don't see any .aws folder like that. You don't see in the user home directory. You don't see any .aws folder like that because we have not configured AWS CLI. Let me execute AWS configure. AWS configure. I'm not giving any profile name. Let me press enter. It is going to ask access key. It is going to ask access key. So you can give your access key. Just this access key. Press enter. It is going to ask a secret key. It is going to ask a secret key. It will provide the secret key. Default region, if you want to set, also set AP South to 1. Preferred format JSON or a text like that. Now, what this AWS CLI will do? Now it will create two files in that system, in that user home directory. One is .aws folder. You can see one folder now, .aws folder. .aws folder you can see here in that user home directory. Wherever you are executing, you can see .aws folder. In that .aws folder, you can see two files. One is credentials file, one is config file. So what is there in this? Let me show you. In the config file, you can see like this. This is like a default profile. This is the region. This is the output format like that. If required, you can see the credentials file. This is access key and secret key maintained here. Now, even though I have not set as an environment variable, even though I have not set as an environment variable, even though I have not provided this, if I run Terraform plan, Terraform apply like that, is this Terraform can source the credentials from that shared credentials file, shared config file, the default profile, is it going to use now? Yes, it will take. It will take from there. Now let's execute Terraform plan, Terraform apply, just a Terraform plan. So it is going to take that from the default profile like that. If required, you can create a multiple profiles. If required, you can create a multiple profiles. And can I use the profile name also instead of default profile? Maybe I can configure a AWS CLI with different credentials, different user access keys and secret keys also I can configure by giving some name, profile name. If required, can I mention that profile name also so that it will use that credentials from there? Yes. Now it is not throwing any error. When I say Terraform plan, it is taking the credentials from that profile default. But now let me delete this. Let me delete this. Maybe what you can do, AWS configure list. You can see there is a default profile. So it is using that default profile. The name for that profile is not set. That is taking this default profile. So if required, I can remove. Maybe what I will do, manually I will remove the file. You can what you can do, maybe manually also you can remove, or you can use some command to remove. Let's say AWS configure. Let's see, is there any command to remove? AWS configure -help. I want to remove these credentials, right? Let me use AWS configure just help command. The way we have a set, definitely there might be an option to remove also. You can see list profiles is there. You can see this list profile to see list profile. Similarly, if required, you can remove also. So there is a command called AWS configure list profiles. So it is going to display what profiles? Only default. Only default. So let's see, is there any command to remove the profile? Manually also you can remove. Manually also what you can do? You can remove that file itself. rm-rf .aws folder. If I am removing, everything is removed. Again, now I have removed that files itself where it is maintaining. So again, if I use Terraform plan, Terraform apply, is there any default profile in that, shared credentials file, shared config file in that system, in that user home directory? No. So this time it will throw error. This time it will throw error saying that no sources found, like that. But if required, you can configure a profile. You can configure a profile with a different name also, like this. AWS configure set AWS configure set hyphen profile. I'm giving some name. The name of the profile I'm giving Terraform, like that, like anything Terraform. So I'm giving a profile name like this Terraform. So it is going to ask access key and secret key. One second. Let me remove this hyphen. Just give AWS configure hyphen profile Terraform. Just AWS configure hyphen profile Terra. This can be anything. You can do. This is like a name of the profile. So let me give access key again. Access key or secret key. This is the access key. This is the secret key. Give that complete secret key. Don't give the complete secret key. Don't copy this double quotes. Okay. Don't copy this double quotes. Give the secret key. Default region you can give AP South 1 also. Whatever format JSON, like that. Now there is a profile. There is a profile with not a default name. Not default name. There is a profile with this name, Terraform name. So in this credentials file, config file, there is a maintain, there is a details, but not with the default with this name. Now even though there is a credentials now in the credentials file and config file of AWS, do you think this Terraform can pick that profile and use that credentials? Now, no, because it will refer only default. It will refer only default profile. But I don't have a profile with default now. This is like a custom profile. So even though there is a AWS CLI configured with this name of the profile, is it taking this use access key and secret key? Is it taking that sources? No. But if required, can I mention the name of the profile in the Terraform block? I mean to say in the provider block. Do we have an option to give the name of the profile which we have configured, like that? Profile, yes. So there is one option called profile. So this is one more argument. This is one more argument in the provider block. In the provider block, the way you are giving access key and secret key, you can give the profile. Suppose if I don't mention the profile, it will use the default profile. It will use the default profile. But I don't have a profile. And again, you can give this option also. But even though you don't give this shared config file, shared credentials file, it will take from this default path. If required, you can give the profile name and also the path of the config file, path of the credentials file. But even though I don't mention these shared config files, shared credentials file like that, even though I don't give the path, is it going to read or is it going to take from that default directory, that is user home directory dot aws folder like that? Yes. And again, if I don't mention the profile, if no named profile is specified, the default profile is used. The default profile is used. You can use the profile parameter in the Terraform, or you can use this AWS profile as an environment variable also, like that. Now, I have given the profile name. I have given the profile name as Terraform. Can I mention this in the Terraform block itself? This is not the username, understand. This is not the username. This is like a profile, the named profile in which you have configured your credentials. So if I give like this, Terraform can read the credentials from that shared credentials file, shared config file, this profile credentials like that. Yes. So let me save this. Let me save this. Let me save this and let me run. Because I have configured a profile, AWS configure list profiles, I can see a profile with that name, Terraform. So there is a profile, we are using that. Now let's say Terraform plan, Terraform apply. But again, you can commit this into the version control system. You can commit this into the version control system. Is there any security leakage, confidential data, or any confidential data here? No. But if you are checking into this in whatever system, if you are executing this configuration, in that system, if there is no AWS profile created with this name, with access keys and secret keys, do you think it will work again? In whatever system you are going to run this configuration, in that system, if there is no AWS profile created with this name, do you think it will work? No. So this is one more option, profile option. So understand what is this? Now I am using profile name. 1 second. What it is saying? 403. I think when I am configuring that profile, I have not given correct access key and secret key. 403 is what? 403 is what, guys? HTTP status code 403 is what? Now it is not saying no credentials found. It is saying 403. What is 403? Unauthorized. Maybe whatever profile I have mentioned, that access key and secret key I have not given properly. So let me do one thing. Let me configure again. AWS configure. There is a space Terraform. So there is a space, I think that was the problem. Let's see. You give correct access keys and secret key. If you don't give proper access keys and secret keys, it will throw error. This is the access key of my Terraform user. This is the secret key. If you see, I have not given this secret key last. You can see last it is showing only till LL9, because when I copy pasted, I forgot this last. That's why you have to give complete secret key. I hope you can understand here. You can see earlier I have given only till this point, but I left this. So it is why it is saying it is not the correct one. Let me reconfigure again. Press enter. Press enter. Now let's say Terraform plan. So this AWS provider. AWS provider is going to source the credentials from this AWS profile that we have configured in the system. So this Terraform plan, Terraform destroy will always use this credentials. Now, even though you close this terminal, and again, even though you open the terminal and run, is that Terraform provider is going to source the credentials from that shared credentials shared config file. Whatever you do, close, open. But in the system, you have configured the profile. In this system, you have configured this profile. But now, suppose I'm going to share this code with you guys. Suppose I'm going to share this code with you guys. Suppose I'm going to share this code with you guys. Maybe you can run, but without configuring a profile with this name, if you run in your system, do you think it will work again? No, error. But suppose you configured AWS CLI without giving a name, without giving a profile name, you configured. Suppose you just executed Terraform configure without this profile name option. So without this option, if you guys executed Terraform configure and provided access key and secret key, in that case, even though you don't mention, even though in the provider block, if you don't mention the profile name also, in that case, is it going to use the default profile? Yes. And suppose you have a default profile, but you have not have a profile with this name. You have a default profile, but you don't have a profile created or configured with this name. Again, do you think it will work? Suppose you have a default profile, but not with this name. In this case, it will throw error. So understand what is this option? What is this option? Understand how it is going to source the credentials? How it is going to source the credentials? Everyone clear how it is going to source the credentials? Give me 1 minute, please. So is everyone clear? What is this profile option with the default profile and this profile like that? And one more option is suppose you are running the Terraform from already AWS EC2. Suppose you install Terraform in the AWS system itself. Let's say this is your Jenkins server, just to give an example. This is your Jenkins server. This is already a Jenkins server, right? It is AWS server. Here, can I attach one IAM role to this server, even though I don't provide anything? Even though I don't provide anything like access key, secret key, profile also I have not configured. In that case, is it going to use that IAM role which is already attached to the AWS EC2? Suppose your provisioning machine, is AWS EC2. Your provisioning machine is you created AWS EC2, you installed the Terraform in that AWS EC2, you are cloning the AWS, I mean to say you are cloning the Terraform code into the AWS EC2. If you are executing the Terraform commands from AWS EC2, that is not a user, that is already AWS resource, AWS concepts, AWS concepts. So can we create one IAM role with required policies and attach that IAM role? Is the AWS provider can use that IAM role? Yes. So suppose your Jenkins server, or a Jenkins system is basically your Jenkins server, Jenkins system is already EC2 instance like that. So here the one more approach it is going to use this profile. I mean to say IAM, IAM credentials, IAM profile. Profile means IAM role basically. So you can use IAM role. So you no need to give any information. If required, you can mention IAM role also. Even though you don't mention also, it will use that role which is attached to that server. You can mention in your provider block, you can mention the role ARN, but even though you don't mention the role ARN also, whatever role it is attached, to the server, it will use that role like that, otherwise you can use profile, otherwise you can use all these things like that. So what are the here in the provider block, what input you can give, right? You can see here access key and secret key, the relevant environment variable name. You can set the values for this also using these environment variables, and similarly region, similarly profile and the shared credentials file, shared config files. Like this, there are some options in the provider block, and you can provide this role details also, but even though you don't give, it will use the whatever role which is attached to that like that. So everyone clear what is this provider block? AWS provider, what we can provide in the provider block: AWS access, secret key, role, or maybe the profile name, like this also. All these options use. So is what is AWS provider and how we can provide the provider configurations using provider block? There are different ways. Now, if I am going to share the code with you like this, if I am sharing the code with you like this, profile name, if I do like this, if I do the profile name like this, if you run that code, with that name, make sure you have a AWS CLI configured with this profile name, with this name. Otherwise it will work. Otherwise you can remove this, and you can use a default profile or environment variables or whatever option, but you have to understand the things, how it is going to pick the credentials. So is everyone clear? AWS provider, how to provide provider related configurations like that. Now similarly, whether you are using AWS provider, Azure provider, maybe in case of Azure provider, real time which mostly is used. Suppose you are running from your local laptop, you are running your Terraform code from your local laptop, what you will use? Suppose you are running in your local laptop, what you can use? You can configure an AWS CLI with a default profile. You can configure a AWS CLI with a default profile, your access key and secret key. There is nothing called real time, guys. Understand from where you are running. So you configure your AWS access key and secret key, right? In the code you may not have anything like this, only limited information. So you are locally, you just provide only these things like that. Then it will use your access key and secret key which you configure, your access key and secret key. But same thing, you are running in some system or some server via pipeline. Maybe if that is not part of AWS, your Jenkins server is not AWS server again. If your Jenkins server is on-prem server or maybe some other server, there can we attach IAM role to the on-prem servers like that? IAM roles to the on-prem servers like that? No. That time you may use again, some user again. So that time in the pipeline, can you use environment variables or secrets like that? Export access key ID, secret key ID, like that. Yes. Suppose your server is already a AWS server only in which you are running the Terraform configuration. So can we attach IAM role and run that code with same thing? You are only having this It can take from various sources. That can be a default profile, that can be a access key and secret key set using environment variable, otherwise IAM role like that. So depends on where you are running, how you are running, you can provide the sources. Understand what I am trying to say? Suppose same code Balakrishna is running with his access key and secret key. If he has a permissions, then only it will allow. Suppose same code, maybe someone else like Vivek is also running, but Vivek don't have a permissions to create this EC2 like that in AWS. Even though he is running, do you think Terraform, I mean say AWS will allow? If Vivek credentials don't have a permissions, no. Understand how things works? Same concept for any provider. Suppose if you are using, suppose if you are using Azure provider, but in Azure provider block also can we use same like access key, secret key like that? Suppose you are using Azure provider to create Azure resources, but in the provider block for Azure, can you use same options like access key, secret key, profile like that? In the provider block of Azure, in the provider block of GCP? No. So it will have its own arguments. It will have its own arguments. So where we can see how we can provide provider related settings to the Azure provider or a GCP provider again. Official documentation. Suppose the way in AWS the way in AWS you have a AWS configure. If you guys are working using Azure, do you use one command called Azure login, AZ login command in Azure CLI? So you can log in to the Azure using AZ login. Anyone work with Azure may have idea. So there is a Azure CLI. There is a Azure CLI. So in the if you install Azure CLI, if you install Azure CLI and you can execute AZ login command to provide your username and password. So if you are using Azure provider, there are different ways to authenticate. So this is the official documentation of Azure provider. You can see here authenticating with Azure. Terraform supports again number of methods for authenticating to the Azure. One is authenticating to Azure using Azure CLI. So you may have installed Azure CLI and you can execute AZ login command. So you guys know like Azure, you can understand. So AZ login, you can provide your access keys like I mean it's not access key, secret key. AZ login using username and password, and there is something called service principal. The service principal like that you can log in and will have the details. So you just use just something. You authenticate with AWS using Azure CLI. You just mention required providers is Azure in the provider block of Azure RM. Azure RM means Azure Resource Manager. So you are using Azure provider in the provider of Azure, even though you don't mention anything. At this point, run either Terraform plan, Terraform apply should allow Terraform to run using AWS CLI to authenticate because we already authenticated to the Azure using AZ login. So it will use that. Otherwise, there are some other ways also. There is a different ways. What is the different ways? Again, all these things you can see here. One is a service principal, service certificate, like IAM role, service principal, client secret, like that. There are so many other ways. If you are from Azure background, you can understand all these things. And again, what options? What options can be provided for this Azure block? I mean to say, in the provider block of Azure, in the provider block for Azure, what we can provide also they are giving here. One is a features, a subscription ID, client ID, file path, client certificate. Like this, these these are the arguments that can be used in the provider block of Azure. In the provider block of Azure, like that. And similarly, same for GCP or any other provider. So based on the provider which you are using to create a resources, you can create a resources based on the selected provider, and you can provide the provider related specific settings using the provider block of that provider. So we are working with AWS, so we are using a AWS provider. We are providing a provider related settings like region, profile, secret key, access key, those type of things using this provider block of for AWS like that. So understand the different ways to provide the source credentials to the Terraform for AWS. Now, the way I have created EC2, the way I have created EC2, if required, can I create a S3 bucket also using Terraform or VPC also using Terraform like that? Yes. So let me write the code. Not same project, not same project. I will create a different project. I create a different project. Maybe let me create a one more folder. Let me create a one more folder here. 03 AWS S3. Now let me go inside this code, inside this folder. But without any Terraform configurations, if I say Terraform init, Terraform plan like that, do you think it will understand anything? If I say Terraform init, what it has to be downloaded, what it has to be initialized? No. So Terraform initialized in an empty directory. This directory has a no Terraform configuration files. So you have to create. So let me open the Visual Studio Code and write the code. Let me open the Visual Studio Code. I will open that folder. I will start writing the code. Let me open this. Start writing the code. So let's create a file. The file name can be anything, main.tf. In this first, what we will do, we'll write the Terraform block. Terraform block. You will mention required providers, required versions. It is not mandatory. If I don't mention required version also, is it going to run? It will run with whatever version, but you are using some options which is not there in that version. It will throw errors when you are applying. Otherwise, you can use this pessimistic operator 1.9. Whatever like this. Required providers, AWS provider. Here there is something called source and there is something called version. Source HashiCorp. If you don't know also, you can go here. Official website, AWS Terraform provider. So there here how to use AWS provider. Go there and see how to use that also. So using the provider, it will say example usage, samples, everything. Source HashiCorp /AWS version like that. If you are using equals, you know already version constraints, right? If you are using equals, for now it will download this version, but there will be a dependency lock file created. In that it is going to record. Even though in the future, if you new versions also came, even though you mention like this also, it will not download unless until you upgrade. Suppose you are using a version constraint like this, pessimistic operator. So when I am executing, so it is going to download this version and it will be recorded. But in the 10 days or after 1 month, there might be a 5.72.3, 5.72.4 came, and I am going to check in that log file, that terraform.hcl.log file in the version control system. Maybe that time Vivek is executing for the first time Terraform init, even though there is a latest version in the for that provider, because we recorded what version we have selected in that dependency log file, and if that is there in Vivek system, even though he is executing Terraform init after 1 month, even though there is a new version, is it going to use whatever version it is previously selected and recorded in that it will download the same version. It is going to download that plugin only. In that plugin only, it will download. But if you have to upgrade, you have to again do the Terraform init hyphen upgrade option. That time it will download the latest version and it will update that in the dependency log file also. That we already discussed. I don't want to get into that every time. We have to understand the things based on your needs. Now, provider block. Here, AWS. Now, region, whatever region, AP, South, 1. Now, here, now I have not set the environment variables. I have not configured the profile with the default name, and I have not using environment variables, or I don't want hard code. I have configured already AWS CLI with some profile name. So can I mention read the credentials from this profile which is already configured in my AWS CLI system like that? Can I mention this? Yes. Then resource block. So I want to create a S3 resource. AWS S3 bucket. This can be anything. Now here, without providing mandatory arguments, if I run, do you think that AWS provider can create this resource type S3 bucket? No. So what arguments can be given for this resource type? We can check in the official documentation. So go to the official documentation. Here you can see S3 bucket also like that. S3, yeah, simple storage service. This is one of the resource type, S3 bucket. So it provides a S3 bucket resource. And they're saying like this minimum they're giving just a bucket name, like a bucket name and the tags like that. This is minimal. But when you are creating a bucket, you can do so many things. If required, you can enable the versioning while creating a bucket. If required, can you create a bucket policies and attach the policies to that bucket like that also. You guys know S3, right? So what is bucket policies, what is versioning and life cycle rule, replication rules? Can I create all those things also via this? Not only just creating a bucket, create a bucket, enable versioning, create a bucket and attach bucket policies, life cycle policies, replication rules, life cycle rules. Can we do all these things also via infrastructure as a code? Yes. But what options can be used, how we can do all these things, where we can refer? You already know what is S3. You already know what S3, what is versioning, what is bucket policies, what is replication policies, what is the life cycle rules. You already know. But if you have to do a Terraform, you just refer the official documentation. But without knowing a cloud like AWS, you know only Terraform. Again, do you think it will be easy for you to work on the AWS using Terraform? You know Terraform very well. You know Terraform very well. Like you know what is Terraform, what is provider, what is resource variables, loops, conditions. But without the understanding of that cloud, that platform, you can't do anything because you may have struggle. You may have a question, sir, what is tags? Sir, what is bucket? What is bucket policy? What is life cycle rule? What is replication rule? What is versioning? You may have these type of questions, right? So now you know AWS and you are learning Terraform. So can you work with the Terraform? And I mean to say, can we use Terraform to create a AWS resource instead of manually creating? Can you create a AWS resources via Terraform? Terraform infrastructure as a code? Yes. So you already know Azure. You already know Azure. So you already know Azure. Now you learned. Now you are learning Terraform. But I am explaining Terraform with AWS. That is okay. You already know Azure. You already know GCP. But I am explaining Terraform using AWS provider. But can we go and use Azure providers to see Azure resources and create them easily? Even though I'm not using Azure provider, but you know Azure and you learn Terraform now. So with that knowledge, you can easily create a resources in Azure. You can create a with GCP. So it is not like a Terraform. You have to learn with Azure separately. Terraform you have to learn with GCP separately. Terraform you have to learn with IBM Cloud separately like that. If you are learning that way, it will never end. DevOps is not a single tool, single technology. If you learn, your whole lifetime also will be over. So Terraform is one category. So if you know Terraform, you using the Terraform, using whatever providers provided by Terraform, you can work with that provider, that resources like that. Understand what I am trying to say? Now I want to create a S3 bucket. So these are the arguments like a bucket, tags. Suppose I want to enable versioning. So there is also one argument, versioning. But there are so many other ways versioning can be enabled, deprecated, because there is a one more resource you can create, a referencing like that. But I will explain all these things in the future session. But for now, I want to create a bucket. Can I do like this? Bucket, name of the bucket like this, and the AWS tags for the bucket. So tags is a array, like a map of objects. Sub tag, I am giving a name of bucket. This is like a tags, okay. Bucket name is different, tags is different, okay. So this tags I'm giving S3 demo bucket like that. And like manage whatever multiple tags also you can give, AWS resource tags. Now we already configured a credentials using this profile, and that has a permissions also to create S3. So if that user don't have a permissions to create a S3, do you think the S3 bucket can be created via Terraform using that provider? No. So because we already given admin permissions, right? So admin permissions it will work. So first what you are going to do, Terraform init. When we are initializing, it is going to do all these things. It is downloading the providers or plugins, and it is recording that information. Downloading the plugins or providers, backend configuration, modules downloading, providers downloading, all these things will happen in the Terraform init. Then you can do the planning, apply like that. Now in the desired state, there is a S3 resource, but in current state, do you have a S3 bucket with that tags in the current resource in the real infrastructure as well as in the state file? No. So there is no state file, there is no bucket also. If I go to S3, if I go to S3, you may don't see a bucket also. Now it's a plan, it will say it has to apply. If I go to this S3, as of now, I don't have any bucket. You don't see. Okay, this I have created. This I have created for maybe something. Okay, this is different bucket. Forget about this. I have created outside of Terraform. Leave it. Now, if I say Terraform plan, it will compare the desired state and current state. It will see what resources to be created. It may say bucket has to be created like that. Use the credentials. It is using the credentials, right? I have not set in the provider block, I have not set as an environment variable, but it is using the credentials from that shared credentials file and config file that is configured via AWS profile. So this Terraform plan will create an execution plan, right? And it will show what resources to be created. But if I try to run apply, that time it will apply the actions proposed by. Now it is saying invalid region because in the provider block, I have given AP's south one. In AWS, is there any region called AP's south one like that? No. This is just AP south one. So here AP south one. Let me save this, fix that, and do the Terraform plan. So you have to understand the errors generated by Terraform also. Errors are messages given by Terraform. You have to understand and work on it. It is not like always happy flow, right? It is always not happy flow. There will be problems. Now it is saying one to add. What it has to add? Bucket. bucket it has to add. We gave only few things only. We just gave a name for a bucket. We have just given the tags, but optional things, is it taking defaults only like that? Versioning also we have not given, replications also are not given, life cycles also not given, policies also not given. That will be default, like default nothing will be there like that. So let me apply, but this time it will throw error. Why it will throw error? Bucket name should be unique within AWS. Suppose if there is already a bucket with a name called test, can I again create a bucket with same name? That is nothing to do with the Terraform. It's AWS concept. So can I have a bucket with same name? No. So what it is saying, you have to understand the errors. It is very very important. What the provider, what that AWS provider is saying now to you, bucket already exists. Bucket already exists. Not in your account. Within complete AWS, you should have a bucket with unique name. So let me give some name. Let's say, let me give some name. Terraform S3 demo Mithun Tech, like this. I'm giving bucket name like this. I will share the code with you guys. If I have a bucket with this name, if you again run with same name, if you try to create a bucket in your account also, do you think it will work again? If I create a bucket with this name, this is nothing to do with the Terraform. This is AWS concepts. So let's say Terraform apply now. It will apply by generating an execution plan. But I have not enabling versioning. I have not created any bucket policies or replication rules. Again, it is not mandatory. As per your requirement, can you enable versioning? Can you create a bucket policies? Can you create a life cycle rules as per your requirement on that bucket? Yes. So as per the requirement, it will, you can create. Now let me go to the S3, refresh. Can I see a name? Terraform S3 demo Mithun Tech. Yes. But for this bucket, there is no versioning enabled. You can go to the properties of this bucket. Versioning is not enabled. There is no life cycle. I mean, so there is no bucket policies. There is no life cycle rules like that. If required, you can enable. That is the requirement. Bucket is in the desired state and current state. If it is same n number of times, if you say Terraform apply, is it going to make any changes? No. It will say no changes like that. If required, you can enable versioning also. If required, you can enable versioning also. But how to do the documentation here, you can refer. So they're saying versioning. Deprecated means I will tell you, because that option is disabled and a new option given. So you can do this versioning. So versioning, it will take enabled, disabled, like that. It will take two options. Enabled, you can take. You can take this option, enabled, like that. But what they are saying, so once you enable what they are saying, you can't disable again. Once you enable the versioning, you can't disable the versioning. Not only here in the manually via in the AWS console also. Once you enable the versioning, you can't disable. By default, it is disabled. By default, it is disabled. If you have to disable the versioning, you have to delete the bucket only. There is no options for disabling the versioning. So you can use this field versioning enabled like that. But they are saying this is deprecated. It will work here. I can say versioning enabled. Now it is going to do. One second. One second. So versioning, it's a nested block. It is not a single object. versioning enabled true. I can give like this, versioning enabled true. It is a nested block. You can see this is like a block. You can understand versioning is a block. So within that block you can use this option enabled. You can give true or false like that, true or false like that. But here it is giving some kind of a, they are saying here deprecated. That option is deprecated. You can see that versioning, they are saying deprecated, optional, deprecated. So Terraform will, you can use this resource like that. There is a separate resource block. This will also work, but they are saying instead of providing this way, you use the separate resource block. There is a one more resource called AWS S3 versioning. There is a one more block called AWS S3 versioning. One more resource. So here you can say something like this: versioning configuration enabled like that. There is a one more resource. One more resource you can create. One more resource completely instead of defining like this. One more resource like this. This is a one more resource block. But here there are some options again for this. This resource type, what are the arguments? Where you can check? You can check in the official documentation only. You can check in the official documentation only for this resource block. So for this resource block, what are the arguments? You can see here. Here only you can see bucket versioning configuration. In this versioning configuration, you can use this versioning configuration block. You can use a status, enabled, disabled, like that. Enabled, disabled, support test, like that. So here within this versioning configuration, status, you can say enabled, disabled. These are the valid values. But you wanted to enable the versioning for a bucket. But to which bucket? To which bucket it has to enable the versioning? How we have to define? This is where there is a concept called referencing block. So for this bucket you want to enable. Here one more argument expected by this block is bucket. It is not going to create a bucket for which bucket you want to enable the versioning. Here can I use the combination of resource type, resource name to refer arguments of this resource again. We already discussed in a dotted notation. So AWS S3 bucket dot main dot ID, bucket ID or a bucket name. You can use bucket ID or a bucket name like that. So we are enabling the versioning for this bucket using this resource block. This resource block is creating a bucket like that. But bucket is already there. But now versioning is not enabled. Now if I say Terraform plan, is it going to say one has to be modified like that because we are enabling the versioning for that bucket? Yes. It will say plan will say a bucket is there. It will try to compare the desired state and current state. It will say enable, versioning will be enabled. Versioning will be enabled. Now let me say Terraform apply. Versioning will be enabled on that bucket. Bucket is already created, but versioning will be enabled if I apply. Now after executing, I go to S3. If I refresh here, you can see this will be versioning will be enabled like that. You can see. So let me apply. Now versioning will be enabled for the S3 bucket. So for this bucket only, for this bucket which we already created, versioning is enabled. Now let me go and see here. Now is the versioning enabled here for that bucket? Similarly, can I create a bucket policies, this replication rules, all these things also? Yes. That we will see later. That we will see later. So everyone clear how AWS provider is managing the resources via Terraform? Now if I say Terraform destroy, if I say Terraform destroy, it is going to destroy that bucket. It's going to destroy that bucket. So you guys were asking why that version constraint is important. Let's say these type of resources added in the latest version. in your code you are using old version of the plugin, old version of the provider, let's say 5.50 dot something. So maybe in this version of the plugin they may not have these type of changes. In that case, if you run the Terraform code against this provider version where you may not have this type of resource type supported, that time do you think that provider can do this thing what you are giving here? Will it able to understand? No. So that is why we are mentioning the version constraints like this. Understand what I am trying to say? Maybe in the future deprecated. They said worsening still you can do like this. Worsening you can do like this still. But this is supported but deprecated. Maybe in the future, maybe in the future, in the 1.70 dot 1. Maybe 5.8, maybe in the 5.80 this option is completely removed. Suppose you are running with 5.80 with this option, in that 5.80 this argument are completely removed. In that case again, do you think it will understand that plugin what you are executing against? No. So that's why we are mentioning the version constraints also, what versions you need like that. So now whatever resources you have created, if I have to destroy, I can say Terraform destroy. It will destroy the bucket. It will destroy the bucket, whatever bucket we have created also. It has destroyed. So in the AWS, if I go and see now whatever bucket I have created, that is destroyed. Let's refresh. This is destroyed. So clear. What is this provider block? What is region? What is this? What is this? What is this like that? So there are so many ways. There are so many ways you can provide the credentials. So try to practice whatever ways we can pass credentials. Try to practice. So from here, I'll continue tomorrow ways. From here, I continue tomorrow. So try to practice whatever ways you can pass the credentials. So based on your use cases, your requirements, you can use those options. From here, I'll continue tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll try to understand meta arguments. There is a concept of meta arguments in the resource block. We'll understand that. If anyone has any questions or queries, let me know. Otherwise, I'll start the session here. From here, I'll continue tomorrow. If no questions, thank you. That's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow. See you tomorrow.